Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Never Mind the Dam Busters. We are absolutely thrilled with the reaction that we've had to the Wuppertal episodes that we did. The sort of feedback's been absolutely mind-blowing, to be honest. And I'm still being contacted by people from around the world regarding Tom Davidson's episode that we did about the Halifax bomber. So that's been wonderful to sort of make contact with people who knew Tom and whose family members have flown with him, etc. And also people who've just been involved in the whole sort of Halifax saga generally. So, James, what have you been up to in the last couple of weeks?
Well, apart from my medieval side quest, yeah, I've been up to a lot of things, actually. I've been looking at the Dieppe raid and RAF contributions in prep for D-Day, which coincides with this episode, and also, well, I'll be talking about the We Have Ways Fest. And yeah, I've been fairly busy. What about you, Jane?
I've had a quite quiet couple of weeks, actually. I'm trying to get my brain back into gear so I can begin writing my next book, which is going to be on the Lofoten Commando raids in 1941. I'm also applying for jobs now that I've finished writing the last book. I suppose I should really try and earn a living, but there you go. And I've also been prepping my talk for We Have Ways Fest as well. Just sent my slides off. It's all done. So I'm feeling really happy about that. But it's coming up very, very quickly indeed.
Nice.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, today we will be discussing RAF Bomber Command's role in Operation Overlord, which is the liberation of Northwest Europe by the Allies. Now, I'm not going to pull any punches here, and I think that the contribution of RAF Bomber Command in Operation Overlord is one of the biggest contributions, possibly the most complete and important of RAF Bomber Command. It takes on everything learnt in the war and now is a part of a cooperative bomber force with the USAAF bomber forces. Bombing was more than just bombing the beaches as well, which I kind of get a bit annoyed about when people say, oh, it's just about bombing the beaches.
That's your bugbear, isn't it?
It is a little bit of a bugbear. Yeah. So you had to bomb the benches, bomb the beaches, and that's it. Yeah, it was far more than that. It's also about, mine laying, and Jane, I mean, you're the expert here. I'm going to leave that to you later to talk about this. It's about supporting troops on the ground. It's the transportation plan. It's about communication links. And it's also about deception plans and such like. And it's so much more as well as this. And I am delighted to say also that later on, we are going to be joined by Dr. Joseph Quinn from the University of Oxford about their finest hour and the project that is going on there. We'll also have some exciting news for paid subscribers.
Ooh. Sounds fun. Right, so let's get back to basics about D-Day then. Right. Everybody's heard of Operation Overlord, and most people will have heard of Operation Neptune, which was the naval element of that plan. But how many people have heard of Maple? Yes, as in trees, as in Canada, as in syrup. Maple is the mine-laying element of the whole Neptune plan. And people say, well, what's Bomber Command got to do with Neptune? It's all about ships, isn't it? Well, no, actually, it's not. Mine-laying was massively important in preparation for the invasion. Now, there was recently one of the We Have Ways episodes talked about mine-laying and mine-sweeping. And I got really excited when I saw the title of this episode. It was actually called Mine-Laying, but didn't actually include any mine-laying. It was all about mine-sweeping. I was rather disappointed by the end, so I'm here to set the record straight. So, brief explanation of what mine-laying is and why Bomber Command is involved. Bomber Command had actually been involved in mine-laying since April 1940, so from the very, very earliest months of the war. Bomber Command had been laying mines in enemy waters. I'm talking coastal waters and I'm talking inland waterways, canals, estuaries, harbours, ports, all that sort of thing, even rivers. What we're not talking about is dropping mines in the middle of the North Sea, in the middle of the Channel. That's what the Navy is for. It's a common sort of misconception that that's what Bomber Command are doing. No, they're not. They coming right to enemy territory and laying their mines right up close to enemy coasts. The reason for that is obviously to target enemy shipping, but in this particular instance, it is to have a deterrent effect. They are trying to defer U-boats, E-boats, S-boats, anything which is coming from the German side which might pose a threat to the seaborne invasion forces. And it forms a really, really important part of the pre-invasion plan, if you like. James, just before we came on air, we were talking a bit about what happened at Slapton Sands just a short time beforehand. Do you want to sort of just expand on that?
Well, yeah, this is the importance, isn't it? I mean, the fear of the E-boats coming in and destroying so many invasion barges and such like, it's played out, isn't it, at Slapton Sands, where you've got hundreds of US troops that are at the front end of this. And the fact is that doesn't happen on D-Day, and a large part of that is down to Bomber Command, dropping mines, stopping the E-boats from escaping. We tend to think of U-boats when it comes to this side of the war, but the E-boats are pretty scary as well. And really, I mean, you see at Slapton Sands what could have happened at D-Day if it had been put on a large scale. But the fact that the E-boats couldn't escape their harbours is down to Bomber Command.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Navy, but we'll come on to that in a moment. So plans got to give them some credit, Plans for mining in support of Neptune and Overlord were already under consideration really at the beginning of 1944. By mid-February, I guess, tempers are beginning to fray at the high command levels, even more than usual, as inter-service relations are certainly being tested to the extreme. So there's a meeting which takes place at Norfolk House on the 15th of February, at which representatives of the Allied Naval Commanders Expeditionary Force, the Admiralty, and Bomber Command are present. And as a result of these and subsequent discussions, the final mine-laying plan, known as MAPLE, as we've just heard, was produced by the end of March. Now, Harris, as usual, Arthur Harris, head of Bomber Command, is creating difficulties and kicking up problems and being argumentative. He objected to a proposal to utilise 2 of his squadrons of heavy bomber aircraft for Maple mining, and it was withdrawn on the basis that it wasn't an economic use of resources, was impractical, and the same outcome could be achieved by different means. Now, the Americans wanted to control the mine-laying operation, but this is furiously resisted by Bomber Command and by the British Navy, by the Royal Navy as well. The reason for that is that Harris is insisting that the organisation and supply of mines for gardening operations should continue to be run through the Admiralty. The reason for this is that it's worked perfectly well for the previous 4 years, and Harris sees absolutely no need to tinker with it. For their part, the Admiralty are insisting that the use of trainee bomber crews from operational training and heavy conversion aircraft for Overlord minelaying is to be kept to a minimum. And the reason for that is that given the scale of the operation and the number of naval craft which is going to be involved, precision in the laying of the mines to exact coordinates is going to be utterly essential. There can be no margin for error. You don't want your mines being laid in the wrong places by inexperienced bomber crews. So they only want experienced crews carrying out this work. I think the sort of contents of the preliminary discussions about Maple are quite revealing, and they also continue to influence academic and public opinion today regarding Harris's view on minelaying, and let's be honest, most other things as well, even today. So on 23rd of February 1944, Harris sends a manuscript note to Robert Sawnby at Bomber Command in response to an Admiralty proposal, which has been relayed by Sawnby, for Bomber Command to undertake extra minelaying in the Baltic on top of the already onerous mining envisaged for the invasion preparations. So the Admiralty are concerned that there's 200 U-boats kicking around in the Baltic, a large proportion of which were fully trained and operational, and that a heavy mining offensive was necessary to basically disrupt their training and to interfere with their access to the open sea. Obviously, they want to keep them tightly boxed in to the Baltic if possible while the invasion is going on. The problem is that's going to involve a huge effort on behalf of Bomber Command, and they're being asked to lay an additional 1,500 mines per month in the Baltic, which is going to take about another 590 sorties per month by Bomber Command's already very stretched crews.
Wow.
This is already on top of what they're already doing. So Harris is absolutely livid at this suggestion, and as usual, doesn't mince his words. Now, I've actually seen the handwritten note in the National Archives, so that you can just sort of envisage him furiously scribbling this note to Thornby. And what he says is, I will not undertake to do any additional mining, especially since the idiotic waste of sorties by the SOE has now to be doubled, and Overlord looks like ruining,
Wow.
if not entirely stopping, the bombing offensive. So you can see where his priorities are. Absolutely not doing himself any favours there whatsoever.
Gosh. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think, his comments, I think, need to be examined against the background of wider offence. Basically, he's just having a massive hissy fit on this particular day, right? So the note then goes on to say...
It's not like Harris, is it?
It's not like him at all, is it? Absolutely not. No. So he then goes on to say that the Admiralty have always, and to this day, still refused to allow us any credit for mining results, which is pretty much fair, to be honest. Regarding the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, either there are no worthwhile results or the Admiralty's attitude is malicious. Whichever the reason, I do not propose to increase the mining endeavour. Note this bit, all of which was originally and still is entirely due to me. So he's claiming credit there for the mining operations throughout the whole course of the war, which, as we will see in a future episode, it's not too far wide of the mark, if you like. So then he says, unless and until I see some signs of appreciation of the efforts of our crews, he's not going to commit to this additional mine laying. And he says, even then, I doubt it would be possible. Basically, he hasn't got the aircraft and he hasn't got the crews to do that much. This has often been taken out of context and used to sort of demonstrate that Harris was against mine laying, but in reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. I think the reverse is true, and it demonstrates his commitment to mine laying thus far, but shows its frustration at being asked to carry out additional mining on top of what his crews are already doing, without recognition from politicians, the Admiralty, or the public. And at the same time, remember, maintaining their strategic city bombing at the same intensity, carrying out additional round-the-clock bombing in support of the invasion, targeting the transport networks and communications that you referred to at the beginning. So there's only so many aircraft and so many crews available, and Bomber Command's resources are all absolutely stretched to breaking point. And you have to remember that they're continuing to suffer still very, very heavy loss at this point. So anyway, getting back to the Maple plan. On the face of it, Maple's basically got two simple aims. First, to assist in the immediate protection of the bombardment and assault forces against attack by German ER boats, and particularly those operating from Le Havre and Cherbourg. And secondly, to assist with the general protection of forces operating in the Channel area. However, the means of actually going about doing this are incredibly complex, and it's all done entirely in conjunction with the Navy, basically. So what they plan to do is to lay a blanket of air-laid, so the ones dropped by Bomber Command, and mowed mines, so the ones that are dropped by the Navy, in crucial points, which is going to protect the invaders from attack, while allowing safe passage, and this bit's crucial, for the thousands of landing craft, bombardment and support vessels, because what you don't want to be doing is laying mines where your craft is coming ashore. So it's got to be absolutely pinpoint accuracy. So you are trying to hem in the Germans, but at the same point ensuring that you're not posing any threat to your own incoming forces. Some of the mines were sterilised. That means that they've got limited life mechanisms, but some weren't. And that means that they've then got to be swept and diffused once the invasion has taken place, to allow ease of access to naval vessels coming in with more men, more troops, more equipment, etc., once the landings have been well established. So it's a really, really complicated procedure. And it's necessary for the lives of the mines to be governed with absolute accuracy, because you don't want them to be going off on the wrong day, or to be sort of deactivating too quickly, or not at all. until then, it had been the practice to fit sort of simple sterilisers which would run the firing batteries down at some time before the date set, with variation on the actual date of operation being accepted. For Maple, however, fingertip control is essential, and clock-operated sterilisers are used in large numbers for the first time. So you've got millions of different types of mines and fusing mechanisms to be employed, including 2 new types of mines introduced specifically for this operation. The first fused by the RAF was a low-frequency acoustic unit, which was virtually impossible for the Germans to sweep without very specialised and heavy apparatus. And this is intended to cause the enemy enormous hassle and maximum casualties. That's the way to look at minelaying generally. It's all about causing massive hassle to the enemy. The second, for use in the Navy's moored mines, was also acoustic, and this was the first time moored acoustic mines. So these are the ones which are sort of fixed with a float to the sea floor, are used by either side in the war. If that all sounds already complicated enough, it's further complicated by the requirement that the entry into Cherbourg had to be clear of live RAF and Navy mines by D-Day +3, this is just 3 days later, and the entry into Le Havre by D-Day +14. And the risk of the new types of mines being compromised prior to the assault has to be avoided as much as possible. So you don't want the Germans to know what you're doing, that you're dropping them. Obviously, you can't just suddenly start minelaying in all these places, because the Germans are going to say, oh, hang on, this looks a bit suspicious. Why are they doing all this minelaying off the coast of Normandy? So you've got to be really, really careful to avoid compromise of the intended date and location of the invasion, whilst ensuring sort of freedom of movement and meeting requirements of the military programme. So as well as achieving all these detailed objectives, in order to capitalise on intelligence regarding enemy movements or his placement of defensive minefields, because remember the Germans are supposedly going to be laying minefields as well to prevent an invasion, it's basically crucial to maintain complete flexibility in the deployment of the Allied minelaying forces, especially during the final stage of the operation. So in effect, the Maple plan has got to be all things to all men. It's got to be specific, a very detailed plan of great complexity, but it's got to retain sufficient flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Sounds like an absolutely impossible task, doesn't it? But of course, we pull it off. Now, in order not to alert the enemy, the plan had to be phased in gradually in 6 separate phases, commencing 2 months before the planned date for Overlord. So while standard minelaying is still continuing off Denmark, the German North Sea coasts and in the Baltic, minelaying off Calais had to cease more or less immediately as part of the deception to persuade the enemy that the northern French port is going to be the likely target of invasion. Because if the Germans pick up, oh, hang on, the Brits have stopped minelaying off Calais, that must be where they're intending to come in. Obviously, that's all part of the deception. Of course, the Germans know that the invasion is imminent, and according to Vice Admiral Ruger, who was the head of the German minesweeping forces in the West up till about 1943, until he became Rommel's naval advisor, the Germans had planned to lay a naval coastal mine barrage. And this was going to be further out in the deeper water. Ground mines with acoustic and magnetic firing mechanisms would be dropped, with moored mines, various types of triggers laid deeper still. So basically, they're planning to do exactly the same as the Allies are planning to do, but they haven't got the means to pull this off. Nothing came of it. As far as Ruger was concerned, the Naval Group Command West had its own ideas about the starting date of the invasion, and it actually ignored requests for mines to be laid in these particular areas, particularly the Seine Bay. And a request for the waters on each side of the Isle of Wight to be sown with oyster mines, which could have caused a huge amount of damage, also fell on deaf ears. So post-war, Ruger is absolutely scathing about the lack of support afforded to Rommel for his anti-invasion plans by the German High Command. Ruger was, and always remained afterwards, very much a Rommel man. I actually write about him quite a lot in my book on minelaying. He's quite an important figure. Anyhow, going back to Harris, RAF have a team of Royal Navy mine specialists who have been seconded to Bomber Command headquarters back in March 1940. So they've been there for 4 years now. They're running this operation absolutely seamlessly, and it's massively successful, the Minelaying campaign up to this date. So basically what they are trying to do is they are looking at strategic and tactical minelaying. So strategic minelaying is covering your ordinary routine operations and any long distance mining. So this is between D-10 and D-1. Basically, the ordinary minelaying which Bomber Command has been carrying out for the last 4 years along the length of the enemy's coast. Tactical minelaying is covering short-distance operations directly related to the protection of the bombardment and assault forces against attack by the E and R boats and U-boats, particularly those, as we mentioned, operating from Cherbourg and Le Havre, and would require very close cooperation with the Admiralty to harmonise the sterilisation of mines in accordance with the Admiralty's own requirements. So everything has to be timed literally to the exact hour just about to make sure that everything runs smoothly and that there's no risk of Bomber Command mines blowing up Allied incoming shipping. So how does it all come off? 600 tactical minelaying sorties are required for April, with the same number in May, supplemented with 150 strategic guarding sorties. So the commitment required of the minelaying crews, most of whom, remember, are already carrying out their ordinary bombing duties in the interim, is absolutely enormous. And then obviously there's further complications envisaged in terms of the weather, so that's going to have a massive impact on when and where mines should be laid as well. So flexibility remains key, and it's a really sort of fine balancing act, juggling all of these different factors to make sure it all comes off. So strategic minelaying in the Baltic, remember to try and hem in those U-boats, is to take place for 10 days before D-Day, while tactical minelaying is going to be undertaken from D-24 to D-3 off Le Havre, Cherbourg, Imogen, Hook of Holland, west of the Scheldt, Western Frisian Islands, St. Malo, and Brest to blockade the U-boat bases on the Atlantic coast to prevent any attacks on the Allied cross-channel convoys, and Canal de Vaud. Then from D-2 to D-1, special mines, those with the complicated mechanisms that we talked about, will be laid off Imogen, Hook of Holland, Scheldt, Brest, and Canal de Vaud, and further mines to be dropped off the Frisian Islands. So it's basically along the whole sort of channel and getting up towards North Sea coasts, you've got this massively complex operation going on. So who is actually doing the work? Well, it's Bomber Command aircraft from numbers 1, 3, 4, 5 and 6 groups, and Royal Navy minelaying ships, Apollo and Plover, 5 flotillas of motor torpedo boats, and 4 flotillas of motor launchers. So it's a massive sort of inter-service operation. So laying begins on the 17th of April 1944. In the 7 weeks between that date and D-Day, nearly 4,000 mines are laid by Bomber Command alone, which is 4 times the original number anticipated, and a further 3,000 by Royal Naval Surface Craft. Now, what was it like for the crews doing this? Lots of people think that minelaying was an easy option. It absolutely wasn't, and that's one of the myths which I'll be shattering in a future episode. I'll give you the example of a young chap called Dennis Field, who's a young pilot serving with 90 Squadron. And he's only been commissioned a few weeks before. And his crew were briefed for mining on the 19th of April. And this is what he says. A quick nip across the channel and back at a couple of 1,000 feet seemed too easy. But the place must have been full of enemy flak boats, and the sudden eruption of fire from the defences as we lined up for the drop was intense. The few seconds taken in delivering the mine seemed interminable, and we were surprised and relieved not to be hit. Clear of the target, Arthur, the bomb aimer, was alarmed to discover that one of the mines had only partly detached and was half rolling around in the bomb bay. I flew very steadily indeed until the bomb doors opened. He managed, by probing about on the lugs, to jettison it. Now, in previous episodes, we've talked quite a lot about 10 Squadron, haven't we? Our last 2 episodes about the Ruptor Reds, particularly focused on 2 10 Squadron crews. What are these guys doing at this particular time? Well, the effort expanded by 10 Squadron at this time is pretty much typical of the burden imposed on the bomber squadrons, combining attacks on rail yards at Lens, Mons-la-Jolie, Hasselt, Boulogne, coastal gun battery sets at Berneval and Trouvelt, and they're also undertaking mine laying off Brest, Saint-Nazaire, German Bight, and they're also doing normal bombing operations over Germany, often on the same night. So you could have the squadron divided up into 3 different groups, and they're all undertaking 3 different sets of operations. And that is replicated throughout Bomber Command at this time. So, for example, the squadron took part in 14 mine-laying operations in April and May alone. Now, you remember Freddie Singh from the previous episodes. He was the mid-upper gunner in the Pentecote crew, who we spoke about quite a lot. Now, Freddie had his tour actually extended due to a spell of illness when he'd missed operations over the Christmas period, so he didn't finish in March like the rest of the crew did. And his aircraft was actually shot down on the raid on the Aachen rail yard on 24th of May. And despite very serious injuries, Freddie managed to bail out and woke up in hospital, where his left leg and his life had been saved by a team of German doctors. He was one of the few prisoners of war to be exchanged well before the cessation of hostilities. But I think that the operations that Freddie was doing, the bombing, the mining, the targeting transport networks, is absolutely typical of what the crews were going through at this time. Did it all work? Yeah, of course it did. Of course it did. Piece of cake, after all that complication. So in his dispatch on the assault phase of the Normandy landings in October 1944, Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay paid tribute to the mine-laying element of Neptune and described Maple as an integral part of the operations, and recognised the unceasing efforts of both Naval and Bomber Command minelayers throughout the course of the war. So on any assessment, Maple was a considerable success. The vast majority of those E-boats, S-boats, R-boats, U-boats didn't get through. They were hemmed in, and it marked the high point of inter-service cooperation in the mine-laying campaign. But the work of the mine-layers isn't over. For the first 10 days after D-Day, very heavy mine-laying is continuing off Le Havre, Dunkirk, the Western Scheldt, and off enemy U-boat bases at Brest and the French Atlantic coast. And as usual, 10 Squadron are in the thick of it, laying mines off the Loire, Saint-Nazaire and Brest. So it's just a constant ongoing effort. But it's even sort of extended right the way up to Denmark and Norway. And this is something that Harris is keen to point out afterwards. Because it was expected that the Germans would attempt to withdraw troops from occupied Norway and divert them to Normandy to basically face the invading Allies, the laying of mines in the Kattegat and elsewhere, sort of south of Norway and north of Denmark, was absolutely essential. And this had to continue despite everything else that they're still being required to do. And it was particularly successful. They didn't get through by and large. So that's the mine laying element. James, do you want to talk about the bombing part?
Absolutely, yeah. And thank you for that. But it's so important, isn't it? It's so overlooked.
Nobody knows about it. Nobody talks about it.
Not just in the course of the war, but you know, D-Day and Overlord and such like.
Yeah,
You've got to stop those German ships, those E-boats and S-boats and all the rest of it coming out of the harbour. Wow.
Nobody ever talks
what an important
about
part.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm going to rewind slightly and go back about a year. So when it comes to Bomber Command, how it's going to approach Overlord, we have to go back to Point Blank. I know we talked about Point Blank before. And the main thing is, from Point Blank, let's destroy the Luftwaffe. We want to get rid of the German domination in the air so that troops can land Northwest Europe, liberate France, then move on and go on to Germany and all the rest of it, looking at May 1944. Now, the directive is in June 1943, and at that point, the RAF, when it comes to bombing, are doing a lot better than the Americans. They're taking it to an absolutely new level. You've got the Battle of the Ruhr, which we've talked about before, which includes the Dam Busters raid. I know we're probably not allowed to mention that. We've got the Hamburg raid, and the US AAF, with their bombing contingent, is found wanting. And the height of this is when it comes to Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Yeah. We have horrendous losses.
Absolute disaster
in daylight.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's at that point, it's going, okay, bombing by night seems to be working. Okay, there are massive questions. over the conduct of bombing, but you're not able to do precision bombing at this point. Now, that starts to change, and the RAF start to get heavier losses when it comes to what Harris calls the Battle of Berlin. So the shift goes from the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany, the factories that are there, to Berlin. It's about hitting the Reich in the heart. I mean, Harris describes it as the black heart of Germany, doesn't it? And you get to, am I right in saying that?
Yeah,
you get to punch a heart in it, or you get to punch in.
Sounds like the kind of thing he would come up with, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's the sort of thing he says, isn't it? Yeah, the black heart of Germany. You get to strike out tonight. And it's a disaster, in all seriousness. Berlin is a modern city. It's not like Hamburg. It's not like the other cities that firestorms have been created in. It's got flak towers. It's got incredible defences. Obviously, it's the capital. It's going to be prepared for this. And the losses gradually get higher and higher. On top of this is with the Luftwaffe and the night defences cottoning on to what Bomber Command is doing. They've cottoned on to a lot of the tactics and such like. You've got the Schräger music, the night music, the jazz music, sorry, the Schräger music, jazz music, which is shooting down bombers. And we talked about this with Dan Ellen, I think, didn't we? The whole fallacy of kind of like, oh no, it's a new type of flak, but actually it was bombers being shot out of the air and blown up in bits. So you've got the fighters shooting upwards and blowing up the British bombers. And the height of this comes with the Nuremberg raid on the 31st March, 1944. 95 bombers are lost. Actually, over 100 are written off at that point. And an absolutely shocking stat with this raid is more RAF personnel are lost in that night than the whole of Fighter Command lost in the Battle of Britain from July to October 1940. It's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just appalling. And most of them are in the spell of about an hour and a half. It's about an hour and a half. Most of those lives are lost. It's shocking, isn't it? And it's the worst night in RAF history. The losses are just constantly banging on. But this emphasises just how the RAF have lost that advantage at this point. And meanwhile, the USAAF are starting to absolutely boss it. So you have Big Week, Operation Argument. One of the big factors is the new long-range fighters, the P-51s with their fuel tanks and such like. They're escorting the bombers. They can go to Berlin and beyond. And the USAAF are starting to hit these targets. Yeah, they're still getting losses, but at the same time, they're shooting down Luftwaffe aircraft. And the rate of how the Luftwaffe can train these pilots cannot catch up with the Allies. The amount of hours and experience that Allied fighters are coming in is way behind what the Luftwaffe can do. They're in a war zone. Let's face it, wherever they train, they're not far from war zone. Meanwhile, the Allies can train in Canada, in South America, in South Africa, in Australia. You know, they could be miles away from it.
They're running out of men, aren't they? Really, the Luftwaffe.
They're absolutely running out of men as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on the ground and as well in the air. Mm-hmm. And more and more Luftwaffe aircrew are being put to defend the Reich, to defend Germany. So they're being taken away from other fronts. They're being drained to the Mediterranean. They're being drained to the Russian front, etc. And that means that in Northwest Europe, where nothing seems to really be happening, bar a few raids and such like, they're being drained even more. This is exactly what the Allies want. They want them away from those beaches, from where their liberation is going to happen. So on the 17th of April 1944, the Overlord Directive comes across. And again, it's about destroying the Luftwaffe, but it's also about the destruction of railway links. It's about communication, about sending those troops forward, about feeding the front, because that's really important, isn't it? It's about logistics. It's about when you have a war machine, you need to feed it. And the Allies are not, stupid. They're aware of this, and they realise we've got this huge bombing force, the British and the Americans. Let's target this feeding. And this results in the transportation plan. And at this point, Eisenhower now takes control of the Allied forces, and Bomber Command moved to support Overlord. Now, Harris, unlike him, reacts very animately to something. And he actually threatens to resign at this point.
Yeah.
He has a massive hissy fit.
Yeah.
But Portal, chief of the air staff, persuades him to stay. And I think this could possibly be a pod in itself, actually discussing this and how key a moment it is for the Allies and the air campaign. As well as the strategic bombing campaign, you've got the tactical air campaign. Tactical Air Force launched with this transportation plan from March 1944. But on top of this, you've also got Bomber Command trying to stem the V weapons, the V1s, and eventually the V2s. So you've got the Radon Peenemünde and such like. So the resources are already being dragged out, even before it started trying to support the plan. The V weapons are important to stop, obviously. But a massive thing is, I've said that the losses are really high into 43, into 44. They start to drop. Mm-hmm. And now the tech really comes into it. So you're using things like oboe and such like. You've got mosquitoes that are having a mosquito, a lot of time for it. They dive down, they drop flares, maximum accuracy onto the target. The heavy bombers follow up and bomb. And this happens a lot. And this is happening to more and more concentrated areas. So when we talk about the transportation plan, you have 2,517 sorties on railways, 70,000 to 10,000 wagons is the reduction that the Germans face as a result of these bombing. So you've lost 60,000 wagons. That's nothing to really shy away from, is it? That's going to have a massive knock-on effect.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that with minelaying as well, because the plan was that if you are attacking the railways, you're going to try and force your enemy onto the rivers instead, the internal waterways.
Absolutely.
But if you're mining those, then he can't use those either. So it's all about completely disrupting his logistics, whether they are sort of rail, road, or waterborne, basically. It's from every possible...
Absolutely.
By every possible means.
The Allies knew what they were doing, and this is why they won, folks. Big spoiler. They knew what they were doing, and they did it well. And this is the thing, it's about transportation of troops. Now takes weeks, not days. And huge resource. That's the other thing is when you're bombing, and this goes for mine laying as well. When you're bombing the transportation lines, the ports and such like, you are diverting a hell of a lot of resources to fix that, and also the defences to protect it for follow-up raids. This is a really, really important factor. So you can go, okay, the railway line is fixed in 2 days. Yeah, that's 2 days away with resources being diverted away from defences in Normandy and Calais, whatever. These are really, really important things that you've got to affect. It's a cumulative effect on the rest of the war. And also the other thing is, now that you've diverted the Luftwaffe away from France and such like, Bomber Command are able to operate in daylight, in which case they're even more accurate with the aids, the navigation aids that have been developed, the bombing techniques, the flares, the pathfinders and such like. And they've got fighter escorts, so anything that does show up is just scared away or shot down. And the other thing that when it comes to Operation Overlord is it isn't just about the Normandy area. It is about the wider area. It's about the whole of the French coast. It's about Normandy. As you said, Jane, it's when it comes to mine laying, it wasn't just like, okay, we're just going to mine the Normandy area, because the Germans would have gone like, aha, right, we know what's going to happen now.
Exactly.
It really isn't. And the part of Calais, I mean, 2 times the amount of bombs, I think, are falling on the part of Calais to Normandy. That's a deliberate policy that's put across. But then the other thing that Bomber Command are doing, sorry, you can tell that I'm having a bit of a rant here. It's just like,
Feel free, rant away, James. That is why we are
This is
here.
my thing. It's my thing. It really is.
That is
but
why
Bomber
we're
Command
here.
are also attacking gun emplacements. And again, not just Normandy. 16,000 tons of bombs, 11,000 sorties. The biggest so far in the war, just on D-Day alone. That is incredible. And the big guns behind the beach, as well as radar sites and wireless telephone stations, are attacked as well. But that's not all. I'm going to carry on. There are countermeasures. There are some very, very clever things going on here. So you have things like, I mean, people that watch The Longest Day, you've got Rupert, the paratrooper that drops down, and you remember that? Yeah,
Rupert. Yeah.
It wasn't quite as sophisticated as that. It was basically a bag of straw with a couple of arms and legs, but
still, to the job.
That's what Bomber Command did. It was still important. It was still important having these, these parachutes dropping all over the place randomly. It was still alarming. It still diverted troops and such like. And Operation Mandrel you have, which is basically firing radio beams into Normandy and elsewhere. It's the first time it's used, and it does fox the Germans because, I mean, let's face it, you've had most of these communication lines bombed, and then you've got all this absolute useless gobbledygook being fired at you. Again, that's Bomber Command. It's 100 Group, who are the electronic, whiz kids when it comes to this. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, they're doing this. And it's, as I say, it's the first time it's used. It's saved up for Overlord. You've also got, as well as the Deception raid, 617 Squadron, who are famous for a raid that we aren't allowed to talk about again. They make orbits above some ships in the English Channel that are heading towards a part of Calais, and the ships have got reflective balloons. And that is a massive deception ploy. So the limited radar that is left
sort of picking
will
up
go,
a
hang on a minute.
Bigger thing on the
Absolutely,
radar,
yeah.
is it? Yeah, right.
But as I say, they drop window. For those who don't know, window is strips of aluminium foil that are dropped out of aircraft, and they float down gently, and it looks like it was used to absolutely devastating effect at Hamburg for the first time, July 43. They use it on D-Day as well. And the Germans are cottoned on pretty much to window at this point. But the fact that you've got the ships and you've got the reflective balloons and such like adds to this kind of like confusion. That's the thing you want to do. You want to confuse. You don't want to completely fox. You just want to absolutely confuse the enemy at the moment. And Bomber Command fly 5,000 sorties in the week of D-Day, which, and this is the fact that absolutely mind blows me, is more than Bomber Command flew in the first 9 months of the Second World War. Now, I know Bomber Command was a small force at the start of the Second World War, but even so, that shows you the scale that it has got to at this point. And the fact that all the things I mentioned before, it is now an incredible force, a multitasking force that has learnt lessons and is contributing massively to the war effort. And of course, later on, you've got things like supporting ground troops, Operation Cobra and such like. Now, there's a contested narrative over how effective that was, but the fact that they were put in that position to be able to do that is miles away from what it could do at the start of the Second World War. I mean, maybe that's a discussion for another pod. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
I'll be quite up for that, actually. Yeah, but yeah, so Bomber Command put in absolutely a maximum effort when it comes to D-Day. 80 years on, I think that contribution personally needs to be highlighted. Which brings us to the next part of the pod, Jane.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we're coming up to the 80th anniversary of the invasion. Next week, or it'll be tomorrow when this podcast is actually broadcast. And that brings us nicely to a new digitisation project from the University of Oxford. I'm delighted to welcome Joseph Quinn from the university to talk about their Finest Hour project. Hello, Joseph, and welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us. What we would love you to do is to tell us a little bit about the project, where the idea came from, and what it's aiming to do.
Well, their Finest Hour project began in August 2022. So it was really open for the better part of a year and a half. And commensurate with a process of gathering stories from the public online through online promotion methods of that kind of nature, we also ran an event program. Now, the events we ran are known as Digital Collection Days. And the model that we're following through organising these events is known as the Oxford Community Collections Model. What this is designed to do is it's designed to set up primarily community-based events where people from a locality can come together, and the organisers would host these events in parish halls, local libraries, in schools, in local museums. So we held 73 events in total, and we have gathered somewhere in the region of 2,600 to 2,700 submissions in total. And we have over 25,000 items gathered into our online archive. We might do a little bit of fact checking here and there, and we will do the normal curation. but we do not change what the people tell us. Within the recording of war history, particularly stories and memories, what we call public history, you will have inevitably a certain amount of mythology. And from our point of view, while the truth of these stories is important, we're also trying to understand how the war is mythologized. Mythologized within families, mythologized within societies, and with communities. And understanding how the Second World War has been mythologized to us is just as important as trying to get to the truth of what a particular person's story is. And bearing in mind, these stories have been passed on to us by the loved ones of members of the wartime generation who have now sadly long since passed away. The wartime generation, as you know, are almost all gone. So it is really their children that are carrying the torch, and they're carrying what fragments of the stories they can remember. And they're recalling them as best they can. And they're telling them, and they're taking their own parents and their own grandparents at their word when they told them that it happened like this. So who are we to question whether their version of events is correct or not? And that is what we have done with this project.
So how did that actually work in practice, Joseph? Were sort of members of the public encouraged to bring along items that they had sort of relevant to their ancestors or family members, or are they just sort of there to tell stories, or is it a combination of two? Are we talking about like physical objects as well?
Well, I'll give you an example. At our Oxfordshire County Library event, which was the first official event that commenced our events program, we actually had another event that took place at the Lee, the Parish Hall in the Lee in Buckinghamshire just before then. But officially, we commenced our events program with the event in Oxfordshire County Library, and we ran the event ourselves. Our team oversaw the event with the help of a number of volunteers. So this is really a test for how these events were going to go in terms of those of us that were going to be travelling around the United Kingdom to support these events in person wherever that was necessary. And there was a gentleman, not much older than me, who had come along, and he was waiting for a long time out in the room. So I promised to get him a cup of tea as recompense for his wait. I duly popped across the road, got him his cup of tea, and then sat him down. And then we began the interview. And within about 5 to 10 minutes, I realised that his grandfather, who he'd come to talk about, and the items concerning his grandfather, were connected with essentially bigot and bogus mission materials to do with Operation Overlord. So I just suddenly realised I have the grandson of a bigot officer right here. For your listeners' benefit, what a bigot officer is this is one of about an estimated 3,000 Allied officers and personnel who have a piece of the jigsaw puzzle connected with the secret plan for Operation Overlord. And when I realised the material that was coming out of the little brown briefcase that he brought along with him, which was all his grandfather's materials, I nearly had a heart attack. I thought, what if he spills his tea all over this treasure that he has brought? And among the treasures that he took out, including sort of photographs that, horizontal and oblique aerial photographs of Sword Beach, we also had a bigot map as well. This guy brought a bigot map, and he didn't fully realize what was in his grandfather's old briefcase. He did not fully grasp the significance of the material that his grandfather had kept from that period of his military service. But he knew it was important. And I explained to him, he had his suspicions that his grandfather was involved in something important. But it wasn't until I explained to him exactly what his grandfather did and how important it was that he understood how important it was that he turned up at that event, and how important it was that he waited until I got to him in due time. And that's just an example.
Now, this whole project and this whole archive, it's not just for academic researchers, is it? Is it going to be actually open to the public as well?
Yes, this is open to everybody. This project was funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, But this material is there for everybody. It is what you can make of it. You can fill your boots with what we gathered. I mean, 98% of what we have gathered is going to be released to the general public on the morning of the 6th of June, 2024. And the only material that we've held back is stuff that may be too sensitive for public consumption, just as they've freely given us this very valuable treasure, this heritage from their lofts, their cupboards, and from their garden sheds and any other secure places where they kept it. We are giving it back to the general public because this is your heritage. These are your stories, and it is only right and proper that you have full, free-to-use access to it.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Where can people access this information from the 6th of June?
Just simply go to theirfinesthour.org. That's theirfinesthour, all one word, .org. And you can also attend our launch event, which is happening on the 6th of June from 1 until 2 p.m. So we will have a launch event to which, everybody's invited. Essentially, if you go to our website, you'll find all the details there to sign up, and the link will be emailed to you. And essentially, from 6 o'clock in the morning, the online archive will go live. A whole range of heritage, object heritage and stories, and basically catalogued records that have been gathered from the public, which is available on a free-to-use basis. And you will be able to search and download and read to your heart's content from that moment onwards.
Wow, I think just jumping in, stuck into that.
I'm just wondering, when it comes to memory and such, right? This is something I'm writing currently in my thesis. It's a fickle thing. It changes over time. Yes. There are influences and such like. I like the fact that you let the memory talk for itself. There's no interrupting of kind of like, hang on a minute. That's up to other people and such like. You let people tell them stories, and I think of my nan. I remember when she talks about a V1 was buzzing over, and she was with her dad, and went, "Oh, it's okay until the engine stops." And of course, the engine stopped as soon as he said that, and it landed, 200 yards away, and they dived into a shop window, and he went, "Get your effing head down." And I always laughed at that because he then said to my nan, "You know that word that I said that you hadn't heard before? Yeah, don't tell your mother about that." Now that changed to it being, it swapped between it being her granddad, her dad and her mum. Now that's a minor detail, but the story still stands, doesn't it? And I mean, isn't that really at the end of the day where the main focus is?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. Like yesterday, we had a little bit of controversy on Twitter over we're doing a social media campaign, and one of the stories that are part of our collection is a story that's anchored around a story that a D-Day veteran told his son, and the story was that I did a round trip from Sword Beach back to the Solent to pick up an ammunition truck and get it back to Sword Beach. And I did that in one day. I landed twice on D-Day. That's the story. And it's not a story as part of a wider story. It's the entire story. It's even implied in the title. My father landed twice on D-Day. Yeah. It's all hooked around that, okay? Now, Steve Fisher, God bless him, he's written a fantastic book on Sword Beach. I know. Anyway, look, I'm not going to get into a debate over whether Steve is right or Steve is wrong or whatever like that. All I can say is that I respect his opinion, and I believe that he's done as much research as anybody about what happened, on Sword Beach and whatnot, and I'm not going to get into an argument with him about it. But Steve Fisher immediately pointed out that could not have happened, and he made an allowance for the idea that that maybe the veteran in this case misremembered. And that what had instead happened was he landed on Sword Beach. He was part of Royal Army Ordnance Corps. They lost an ammo truck. He was sent off to get another one. And rather than go to the Solent, he went to the Sword anchorage, which was 9 miles offshore. Now, that journey was possible, and it is possible that he could make it back by 10 p.m. that night, as the veteran said happened. So that might have been possible, and that might be what happened. And that's a very simple thing. It's a very simple what's the word I'm looking for? Disambiguation of what is actually a true story. And veterans misremember all the time.
Absolutely,
or perhaps, I didn't come across in the course of my own oral history work, and particularly with D-Day veterans, I didn't come across anybody who I felt was lying. Veterans misremember all the time. It's one of the problems with oral history, and it's something that, and it's a problem that even more, shall we say, present. It manifests to an even greater extent when it comes to crowdsourcing efforts such as these. There's obviously going to be these inaccuracies in terms of memory filtering through, but are we going to change those details? Absolutely not. Are we going to say that veteran was wrong? Absolutely not. What right have I to turn around to that gentleman who, at the kindness of his heart, probably with a great deal of emotion and sentiment, at the kindness of his heart, gave us this story? What right have I to turn around and tell him that his father was a liar? That's the thing. We are going to leave these stories alone. We're trying to preserve the public history and memory of the Second World War at source, exactly as it is. Because this is not just about preserving history. This is about assessing public knowledge of this history and how well they have absorbed their own family stories, to what extent they may have mythologized their own family stories, how well does their knowledge of what their father or their mother or their grandparents or their great uncle or some other relative, how well does their actual knowledge of what they did tally up with a more general knowledge of the Second World War? Not everybody out there is an expert in the Second World War. I don't know everything about the Second World War, and I've been studying it for the better part of 2 decades.
The more I learn, the less I know.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I could go on and on about this forever. Yes. Can I ask you, are you interested in hearing a couple of RAF Normandy stories?
Oh my goodness, yes, absolutely.
Go on,
and I'm going to start off with the story of Warrant Officer Frederick Mahoney. Okay, so he is in 161 Squadron, Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve, service number 976750. So Fred Mahoney is from Cardiff. Okay, he's born there on the 10th of April 1917, and he's the youngest of 9 children. A typical Irish family, shall we say. And essentially, Fred has the normal Irish Catholic upbringing. He goes to a Catholic school. And at the age of, I think it's about 19, he joins the RAF Reserves. And he qualifies as an air gunner in August 1941 and is an instructor by November 1943. He's stationed at various airfields all across the Middle East. He clearly does a few tours of duty in various capacities. And he ends up meeting and marrying a girl called Catherine or Kitty Theresa McConnell, possibly Irish herself. And they get married at the Catholic Church in Cardiff in January 1944. And he's at that point serving as a warrant officer with 161 Squadron. And basically he's flying out of RAF Tempsford, Bedfordshire. Now, what do you think he was doing flying out of Tempsford?
SOE?
What does SOE? Yeah. He gets involved in SOE operations, and essentially his wife didn't realize, and many people within his family had no idea the kind of work that he was doing at the very end. His final mission, he was shot down over Denmark, dropping arms to the resistance there, and he was taken down. His flight was taken down by a Kriegsmarine flagship and crashed into I think it's Limford Fjord off Livo Island. Yes, that's right. And his body was actually found washed ashore on the 21st of May 1945. So it's very sad, really. He actually he died just a couple of months before the war was over. So that's 4th of March is when that happened. But he dropped arms to the resistance in France. He was on quite a few missions over occupied Europe. So that SOE work, particularly around the time of Operation Overlord and the build-up, and even afterwards, supporting the Jedburgh missions, would have been absolutely crucial. And I've little doubt that he, been involved in special operations, would have been critical, as many of those personnel were, to supporting Operation Overlord in terms of supplying resistors behind enemy lines. Another story, for example, you would be able to, if you're able to look at the story, for instance, of Bill Cleland. Bill Cleland is part of a navigator squadron, and he's taking part in a lot of operations which are sort of, they're guiding effectively bomber streams over to France. They're not doing any flying on the 6th of June, but they are doing plenty of flying in July. There's a huge amount of operations that they're involved in, and they're bombing targets in Germany, but they're also bombing a lot of targets in France. So this gives you the idea that really you have all these operations taking place in support of Overlord, but before and afterwards. And you have a huge amount of operations that are taking place to really hollow out the German war machine and attack their supply lines. And another example of this is the story of Harry Purver, who's a navigator with 77 Squadron. And Harry Purver served as a volunteer. He's a navigator with Bomber Command with 77 Squadron. He's flying out of Full Sutton Airfield in Yorkshire. And he's with a mixed crew. There's crew members from all across the Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And basically, the record says, and you're going to laugh at this, it says on the story record, although they didn't fly on 6th of June 1944, they played a part in destroying the German railway lines. Now, you're probably rolling your eyes and just saying, yeah, but I only care about D-Day. Well, let's look at what they were doing in and around D-Day. So basically, from the 8th until the 12th of June, they were bombing targets right across France. At a place called Alençon, they're bombing marshalling yards. Paris, marshalling yards. Amiens, marshalling yards. Avranches, they're bombing railway junctions and marshalling yards.
That's all part of the transportation plan, isn't it?
It's all part of the transportation. They're basically, they're taking part, they're still taking part in nighttime raids, but they are basically destroying all the major critical railway arteries right across France, trying to disrupt the supply chain, basically to support the Germans in Normandy, the German resistance against the Allied advance in Normandy. And you can very clearly see what Bomber Command are doing here. Just in the week that Overlord takes place, the landings take place on the 6th, which is a Tuesday, and for the remainder of that week, his squadron, 77 squadrons, are hitting every major marshalling yard and depot right across France that could possibly be connected with the resupply and reinforcement effort in Normandy.
But actually, you hit the nail on the head, and this is something that I want to talk about when it comes to D-Day. It's not just about the beaches. It is about the transportation plan, the deception plan, and the mine laying. It goes absolutely beyond this, and it's months ahead of D-Day. And that's something that we really need to appreciate and think about, isn't it? But anyway, coming up, and thank you again, Joseph. This has been absolutely fascinating and brilliant and wonderful to talk to you. We have, in our next episode, an absolute treat. We're talking to my good friend and the brilliant author and historian, Dr. Sarah Louise Miller, about her new book, The Lancaster Story. And we've also got a really fantastic myth-busting episode about Arthur Harris and area bombing with the wonderful Alan Allport.
Yeah, we recorded that one a couple of weeks ago, but it's coming out sort of post D-Day, if you like, and it is an absolute belter. It is fantastic. I learned so much just in the course of that conversation, just sitting chatting to her.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
And I can't wait to chat to Sarah Louise. She's just so lovely. Right, finally, before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention that as a thank you, we'll shortly be inviting our paying subscribers to sit in on some of our recording sessions and witness the chaos and the many, many outtakes for yourselves. If you think that...
Spiders included.
Yeah, spiders included, yeah. If you think it sounds slick-ish when we actually publish it and when it's broadcast, basically couldn't be further from the truth. It's usually absolute chaos, but never mind. Yeah. So we'll be sending emails out in the next couple of weeks to our existing subscribers. But if you'd like to get on board from just $3 a month, click on the link in the show notes or visit the show's main webpage at nevermindthedamnbusters.buzzsprout.com. So thank you very much, and we will see you again next time. Thanks. Bye.